Hi, everyone. So waited a couple minutes for everybody to log in, so I think we're ready to get started. So thank you for taking the time this morning or this early afternoon to be able to join us for this webinar with CDW and our friends with F5 to talk about staying safe with CDW and F5. A couple of housekeeping notes to get started here. If any of you have any questions during this presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat window. We do have a question and answer period at the end, and we'd like the chance to be able to get to any questions that you have. We're also going to be recording a copy of this presentation, so for if it's either you want to be able to review this content later or there's somebody else on your team who wasn't able to attend, we'll be sharing that out after the call. And if you have any questions that follows this presentation, please feel free to reach out to your CDW account manager, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. We'll also be sending out the vouchers for the food delivery after this presentation, so look out for that on your email. Just taking a couple minutes about who CDW is for those of you who may be less familiar. So CDW internationally is one of the world's largest IT providers, 35+ years experience in a number of different avenues related to IT and IT services, a tremendous logistics engine and international capabilities in a wide variety of subjects related to the IT concerns that many organizations have. And within Canada, the organization itself has been here for 25 years. The CDW business itself, has a long-standing tradition working with organizations, everything from small and medium businesses all the way up to very large organizations. And in the last year, CDW also acquired the organization I was working for previously, Scalar Decisions, to bring in some of the consultative services-led discussions that our team was able to bring to help what CDW was already helping organizations with for their IT strategy. So we're fortunate to have almost 1,000 employees across Canada. We're in many of the major cities across the country with both your sales and marketing teams that you're used to speaking to directly, as well as a lot of technical folks like myself who exist in those offices across Canada. Have over 27,000 customers, and looking forward to continuing to have these sorts of conversations, helping with more complicated security issues. So speaking a little bit about our cybersecurity practice here in Canada. So taking the approach of following the NIST cybersecurity framework in terms of understanding the pillars of focus that we have as a security practice. So we break this down primarily into the 3 pillars of prepare, defend, and respond. So just a brief introduction for myself. My name is Mitch Kelsey. I'm a cybersecurity advisor here with CDW. So I'm primarily concerned with having conversations related to this prepare field. And so that's more often having those strategic conversations with customers to be able to understand, what their critical objectives are related to security and help build that strategy. I also get the opportunity to work alongside our security solution architecture team, as well as our partners in cloud and infrastructure and some of the other service areas that definitely relate to security, to be able to identify what those solutions look like that make sense to be able to meet those security objectives that you have as an organization. And then we're also able to help with some of those services on organizations' behalf through our managed security services team. So everything from our 24/7 SOC to our vulnerability management services practice of being able to help organizations to enhance their security practice as well. So F5 is one of our major partners that we work with in this space. We're F5's #1 partner in Canada. We're a platinum partner of theirs. And we're fortunate to have resources within our organization to help support conversations that you may have with F5. So over 100 certifications, 4 dedicated pre-sales people with 3 post-sales delivery engineers as well. We also happen to be the only authorized training center for F5 in Canada. So for organizations that need to better understand the platforms in their environment and need that additional skill set development, they often come to us to be able to help them understand that better. We can also help organizations deploying F5 to be able to help improve the way that their implementation is working for them. whether that is that initial design, install, and configuration, or reviewing and improving best practices that you may have. So just a brief agenda for what we want to get covered today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the insights that we have as a security company here in Canada, and then a little bit about the problem space here that we're addressing, how attackers are able to get in and leverage fraud in organizations, and then give you the opportunity to speak to Jason Lang, who's a security engineer with the F5 Shape team, who's going to be able to talk to you more specifically about the way that Shape can help you solve these problems. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A period there at the end. So for some of you who may not be aware, CDW has been putting together a Canadian-focused security study for the last 5 years. And one of the interesting things of the last year, and again this year, is last year was the first time that 100% of the respondents to the survey that we spoke to had experienced some sort of cyber attack in the last year. So 2 years running, 100% of those organizations have faced them. And we broke that down into a couple of different categories, and these are more of your typical attack patterns that you would expect to see. So whether it is that initial infiltration, so an organization was subject to a phishing attack or something like that, their data had actually been exfiltrated, so the attackers were able to get in and leave with some valuable information, or if they just had launched an availability attack, like a denial of service attack against the environment. And we're able to quantify what this cost looks like. So on average, your cost is going to be a couple of $1 million for one of these events to happen in the environment if it is successful, which obviously is of huge concern. But what these types of attacks don't often take into account are circumstances where an attacker may already have valid credentials. So in that particular case, if you don't have the tools in place to be able to identify whether or not an attacker may be legitimate, they're able to walk right past a lot of those defenses because they're using credentials that they were able to freely find online. So the trouble with this is the individual actions of an attacker, because they're using valid credentials or seemingly valid credentials, is the individual actions that they're going to take may look typical from what you're going to see from your other users. As well, these campaigns tend to be quite automated and massive in scale. So it may be the case that you're facing a series of attacks against your environment at the same time that individually may not be concerning, but at a larger scale may be problematic. The example that I heard historically was one of the more successful attacks at the beginning of this sort of online fraud was taking a small sum of money from every account they could get their hands on. So for each individual account owner, probably not something you're going to notice, but as a business, it's a tremendous amount of money. And in many cases, this may be happening across many, many businesses at the same time. So it can definitely be difficult to track. And unlike these other attack vectors, online fraud targets your publicly available resources. So they're services that you are hosting to provide value to your customers or to provide some service to your vendor partners. And so you need to take a different approach to securing these environments than you do for some of the crown jewels that you would expect to be behind a defense in depth type security practice. So how is this actually happening? So there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. One of them is another finding from our security study is that a tremendous number of breaches that were experienced by the customers that we spoke to were the result, at least in part, to some poor security hygiene by a third-party partner. So I'm sure all of you have received the same type of emails that I have, that the credentials that you had for some service online were breached as part of some sort of misconfiguration or other hack that occurred there. And that is now getting to the point where there are now millions of these credentials that are available online. There's one particular cache that's hit the news recently, 5 billion unique credentials that are available for purchase from 100,000 different data breaches. So that is a tremendous amount of information that attackers now have about many people online. And they can use this in attacks to be able to pretend to be the people whose accounts have been compromised. And within these applications, there's a couple different ways that this often happens. The most common that you you see from news reports are storage that was not properly secure. So most common one that you hear as of late seems to be AWS S3 buckets that are open and full of sensitive information that hopefully in the best scenario, a security researcher finds and is able to tell the organization about. But in many cases, that information is stolen and used for nefarious purposes. Attackers can also attempt to compromise weak controls that are in place to prevent users from accessing parts of an application that they shouldn't, and stealing credentials like passwords, keys, or session tokens to be able to either further their compromise of that environment or just pivot and take that information elsewhere to commit fraud. Similarly, broken access control, an organization that has not appropriately implemented access control, that attacker may then be able to jump to a different account within the same environment, which if we're talking about financial services or loyalty points or personal sensitive information, being able to access another user's account is as problematic as it is that that attacker is able to get admin credentials. And finally, there's the other story about being able to just leverage some flaw that existed in the application, whether it's outdated software or some misconfiguration that was put in place that an attacker was able to use to get that initial foothold. And with these credentials, there's a number of different types of things that they're able to do within an environment. So one of the most common and most difficult to detect with many tools is credential stuffing. So it's exactly what I just mentioned. There's no brute forcing or any sort of guesswork needed. They're taking valid credentials that they found online with the expectation that those end users are likely to be reusing their passwords. So they take that same username and login details, whether it's a password or what have you, and then leverage that against as many different services as they can and see if they're able to log in. From that point, then they're able to get access to that account, and whether they're then harvesting credentials or credit card information or other details about that account or using it to be able to commit further acts of fraud, they already have that now legitimate access to that account. Alternatively, attackers are also getting in and putting together gift cards to be able to drain the information that is there, effectively laundering the money that would have been existing on those gift cards to be able to clear those accounts out. They're also doing things like click fraud. So you've seen organizations online who advertise and are expecting to see click-through revenue to their own sites. There's ways to weaponize that and do that fraudulently to be able to make money as an organization. Or alternatively, look at sites that have reviews to be able to pump them full of fake content to either overestimate or underestimate the value of something online. And then there's the frustrating things, as a personal consumer, like auction sniping. So, any of the hot new products that are going to be coming out this Christmas for, the family members that we're looking to buy things for, many organizations are now using automation to be able to, snap up all of those inventories of products and then selling them at a massive premium because they have the ability to do that through automation. So there's a wide variety of challenges that different types of organizations need to face. But the common thread with all of these is individually, these actions look like they're authentic. And the challenge is understanding whether or not these are legitimate users of your platform to be able to ensure that you're going to provide them the services that they would like to see and blocking those that don't meet that standard. So this is the question, is, to what degree is automation a potential problem for these sort of acts within your environment? And it's a question in terms of understanding what your own application presence looks like online and what sort of ways a bad actor would be able to exploit this for their own benefit. So an important question is, how are you able to identify the users who are legitimately using your product? And how do you know that you can validate that information? Are you able to determine what would be considered malicious? What are the controls you have in place for fraud today? And is that going to be able to identify what seems to be a legitimate user that was passing off credentials that aren't actually theirs? And then finally, I think the last point to keep in mind here is, as application owners, it's important to not only protect against these sort of fraudulent activities, but also to be able to protect the credentials of your own users. So a lot of those best practices are, throughout the supply chain are important to make sure that we're able to keep each other safe. And that's a conversation that we often have with organizations. So that gives you an idea in terms of some of the landscape that's to address here. And now I want to turn it over to Jason Lang, Senior Solution Engineer at Shape, part of the F5 family, to talk about how Shape specifically can help you address these problems.
Thanks, Mitch. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So Shape Security, which was recently acquired by F5 in January, I'm here to talk about a variety of different problem sets that Shape addresses. And the title here is called Stay Safe with CDW and F5. And we're going to get to it's a little bit of an inside joke on our side of what that means very shortly. So Shape was acquired by F5, as I said previously, and we're now a complement to the F5 product set, where we are pretty much targeting the abusive use of your applications on web, mobile, and API. But we're not traditionally talking about things like security vulnerabilities, any type of CVEs or that type of issue. We're talking about automation or even bad humans that are using your apps perfectly as intended, but to do nefarious activities. Log in with stolen credentials, as Mitch mentioned, commit some type of fraud or extract some type of monetary value from that account, and then obviously profit on their back end. And credential stuffing is certainly a hot topic. According to CISO magazine this year, credential stuffing is the #1 hot topic of 2020 for CISOs. And it's actually, coincidentally, a term coined by one of Shape's co-founders. And so that's when you take one of those lists of the several billion credentials and then you toss them at a particular login page and see if they work. And so Shape has been really exceeding in this particular area for the last 6 or 7 years. We now cover approximately 40% of the Fortune 500 business to consumer brands. Those are some very, very large brands, some of the logos pictured here on the slide. And in Canada, we have a very deep presence as well, with quite a number of the financial institutions that many of you likely deal with on a day-to-day basis, and quite a number of Canadians' largest retailers. So Loblaw is a very loyal customer of Shape's, and we're happy to have them. We've been solving a lot of problems for them on the automation side, and also very recently we've expanded what we're doing to solve some of the problems that they're having with fraud on their loyalty program. Shape protects more accounts daily from fraud and abuse than any other fraud and security vendor in the world combined. It's a pretty bold claim, but we're able to make that claim based on the cachet of the customers that we do have that are part of the Shape family. And just per capita, for example, Starbucks, just one of our customers, there's more customers on the Starbucks platform than probably most of the banking institutions in North America combined. So there's a ton of traffic that we see every day, and we use that traffic to our advantage. So the problem we're really trying to solve is one of 3 things. Attackers generally are trying to get past the defenses. So again, as I mentioned off the top, we're not talking about traditional CIA triangle issues. We're not talking about vulnerabilities that a WAF would solve. We're talking about bad actors. And one of the problems with this is the first challenge is, how do you know if a particular transaction to your application or your mobile app is actually a human? There's been a lot of various technology startups in the last 10, 15 years that have tried to solve this. 2FA and MFA is an obvious way that many have relied on to do that challenge. But it's Shape's view that if you do a 2FA challenge to a good known customer, that's a failure of your 2FA stack. And so Shape really helps to solve the problem first and foremost, are you bot or not? And we feel very strongly that we're the leader in this space. Once you've cleaned out the automation, you can then look at some interesting metrics with the data that you have behind. And the question we're trying to answer is, are you good or bad? Are you conducting fraud with this application? Is this something suspicious? Or are you just a regular user and we should let you in unimpeded? And then the third thing here is mostly for the good customers. Are you who you say we are? Can we remove some barriers perhaps to log in? If we know it's you visiting from the same device you always do, we don't need a 2FA step-up challenge. Think of the last time you logged into Amazon to buy something. They make it very easy for you to transact with them and conduct business. So Shape actually can help you generate revenue for your customers and your loyal customers, which is probably something you're not used to hearing about a security tool. So Shape first starts off by really understanding the user journey. And pictured here is obviously a financial journey, but ultimately at the end of the day, every application is the same. You have a beginning where either you have users who are browsing for a particular product that you're trying to offer, and part of that, once they decide to move forward, is to create an account, or you're servicing the existing customer base where they're going to log in. So that's usually the beginning of every single application, regardless of what vertical it's in, whether it's finance, retail, hospitality. The next step is the middle piece, right, where they're going to be transacting with you, whether that's finding some transactions to transfer some money, purchase a flight, buy something online. That's the action that they're doing. And at the end, they're completing that transaction. And the hard problem here is to figure out which of those particular events are good and which of them are not. And so we have started off, again, as I mentioned, with solving the bot problem. So Shape really solves the bot problem with two products. Shape Enterprise Defense is sort of our bespoke managed, fully managed service, where we customize the solution extensively for the customer. But part of the F5 acquisition is now we have an option called Shape Defense, which sits behind and is integrated into F5 Silverline. So Shape Defense or Shape Enterprise Defense guards the front door. So we're providing protection to the login pages, the contact and advisor pages, the chat bots, the create account pages, anywhere where we see rampant automation really causing problems downstream. At the end of the day, we're trying to answer the question, are you actually human? And we're able to do this in a way that doesn't involve things like CAPTCHAs. We're completely transparent. No one knows we're there. Just a point of mention, you probably have Shape on your phone 3 or 4 times already without even knowing that we're there. So just a little example. This is a Canadian example of a quick service restaurant that did a POC with us. And the first phase is, unsurprisingly, using automation against the login of their particular application. So as Mitch mentioned at the top, again, there's billions of credentials available for sale or for free on the dark web and other forums. Any random list that's sufficiently diverse with different email addresses and passwords against any random login portal is going to result in anywhere from 0.3 to 3% success, meaning some of those accounts are going to work. And the problem is humans are lazy. Google put out a nice survey a couple years ago that said 52% of users reuse passwords on more than one site, and 13% of users reuse the same password on all sites. So what this happens is what we call this a credential stuffing attack. And this then leads to account takeover or ATO. And traditionally that ATO is done by humans. It's not generally done by automation because there's things that humans are better at doing. They want to look and see what's in the account. They might be wanting to take some type of information. It could be financial, it could be loyalty points, it could just be harvesting PII data for sale later on the dark web. But in this example, and this is just the Hamburglar strikes again, where the McDonald's app has been numerous times victim to this exact attack vector, is unwittingly, if you have reused your password and it's known somewhere else, then someone else can log into your account and transact on your behalf with a stored payment form, and then they get to eat for free. So this is an example that we saw here in Canada, and the percentage of traffic that was automated to the login might surprise you. 99.7% of the traffic on their login was not human. It's automation, and it was relentless. It doesn't stop. It's always there. So Shape can absolutely block that type of traffic. Obviously, and you might be asking, well, how do I know if I have a problem? I don't really think I have a problem. If your traffic doesn't have a nice day-night pattern that you'd expect with humans, especially in your time zone, if it's just a constant, mostly horizontal rectangular line with a few blips, you absolutely have an automation problem. This was a US customer. This is a snapshot from our dashboard where the green human traffic has a nice diurnal pattern here on the bottom, but the automated traffic you can see spikes at close to 17 million logins per hour. This is orders of magnitude above their normal human traffic, and this is what Shape does all day. We don't talk about it. This is just the problem space that we solve, and we remove that automation again in a frictionless manner. So there's no challenge by any of our solutions to like solve, pick all the stop signs or pick all the school buses out. The other thing that you could do as well, if you're not already doing it, if you have a login page or even create an account page, is within your telemetry, try and figure out what percentage of your logins are successful versus not successful. From the data that Shape sees, about 70% of your logins should be successful all the time. If they're drastically not, if there's a period of time where all of a sudden the login success rate drops to like 1 or 2%, you absolutely have a problem with credential stuffing. That's something you can do to look at. And there's a lot of different bot solutions on the market. Just recently, there was a blog posting by a competitor that claimed that they solved, they saw the largest attack ever at 44 million account takeovers over 2 days. That's nothing for Shape. We don't blog about it because we see orders of magnitude higher than that. Even here in Canada, there's a credit union we were working with a few months ago. They shared with us that their annual login traffic is around 26 million events in a year on their web. But over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, they saw 90 million, 3-4 times that amount of traffic in a single weekend against their login page, obviously with the intent to commit fraud. Now you might be saying, well, hey, I have a WAF and it's got brute force protection and it has signatures and has rate limiting. Won't this be effective? And unfortunately, the answer is it is no longer enough. We see this is an actual customer's traffic. This was a major Canadian Big 5 bank. The yellow is automated traffic. You can't even see the human transactions because they're there. You just can't see them. And then the red is when Shape goes into mitigation mode. You'll notice a few things. There's massive volume of traffic. This actually caused public outages of their infrastructure. They were down for a few days. As soon as Shape was in mitigation mode, the attackers tried various tactics, but ultimately went away. They then pivoted to another target. What's interesting here in the WAF space is there were almost 300 million events during this timeline from a massive infrastructure. 240,000 IPs, 9,000 different networks, and 78 million different, supposedly different devices or user agents were used. I just don't see it's feasible for you to be able to block this with a WAF. If you're rate limiting, that's an option, but then you're also penalizing the good customers along with the bad. And at the end of the day, it's just not very effective. And so this is what that same customer looks like today. Shape provides an outcome of protection. So we're solving the problem for you to let you focus on the things that you're trying to get done in a regular year, COVID-19 or not. There's obviously different priorities that you have in the organization. So we absolutely solve this problem. We are there fighting the problem and constantly on top of the attackers who will retool. If there's anything of value, they're going to keep trying. And we provide protection on web and mobile, as well as API channels or machine to machine. And so in this diagram, there's less than 1% unwanted automation, which is kind of our gold standard of what we strive for most customers. We do see some attacks that have come in and they are mitigated without Shape really having to do anything. It's a testament to what we do behind the scenes. And if you're wondering about, well, how much does it cost? Think about how much an attack costs. Again, on average, 0.1 to 3% of any randomly diverse list of credentials used against a victim will result in success. And there's some industry benchmarks that would say an account is anywhere from $200 to $500 each for you to be able to basically clean up the problem. So a moderately small credential stuffing attack is going to come in probably around $150,000 to $200,000 at a minimum for just that event. And that's not the downstream fraud that might happen as a result. That's just the account takeover credential stuffing attack itself. And if we're talking, millions of accounts, like in the previous two slides against that bank, roughly 30 million accounts were successfully validated. If you assume there's even only $100 in that, that's a massive potential for fraud. So what we often find is during a POC, the ROI of Shape pays for itself, even in those couple weeks that we're looking at your traffic. So I'm going to pivot a bit away from the automation. I'm going to now talk about our fraud engine. And this is where that sort of SAFE inside joke comes from. SAFE stands for the Shape AI Fraud Engine. And the beauty of that we think of our solution is that we're using the clean human data as part of our Shape Defense or Shape Enterprise Defense solution. And so what you have is you have this issue of all the current fraud tools are likely polluted and have a really hard time with understanding, is it human or not? And if your fraud engine is too busy, it's all choked up processing synthetic or bot traffic, then it's not as effective as it could be. We've heard some financial customers recently mention that like RSA adaptive auth gets tripped up and actually increases the points in the risk score by 100 to 150 out of 1,000 when there's automation included in that traffic. So Shape solution, so we had Shape Enterprise Defense guarding the front door, but then we have our Shape AI Fraud Engine, or the SAFE solution, that's monitoring the entire user journey. And again, it doesn't have to be financial. It can be retail, it can be hospitality, travel, if we ever get back to that. And the solution is really, again, trying to weed out fraudulent human behavior, but we're doing this in real time. And so there's not that 30, 60, 90-day lag or more that we traditionally see in the financial space. Again, some examples, and I'm just pulling these at random. We've heard of instances where gift card cracking is very prevalent. I think there's been some Canadian brands in the headlines in the last 12 to 18 months where unsuspecting Canadians went out and they tried to spend the gift card they had for a major retailer, only to find out that when they went to use it, the money's already gone. How does that happen? Well, it happens through brute force and credential stuffing. Type of attack, right? They're not testing credentials, but they're testing cards. All you have to do is go to any Home Depot, Shoppers Drug Mart, Rexall, London Drugs for you in Vancouver, and just look at a couple of gift cards on the back and take a picture with your phone. You'll get to know the first like 6 or 9 digits that particular vendor starts with, and then you can just programmatically try every single combination, and you'll have success. Similarly, on retail checkout pages, we've also heard examples where unsuspecting merchants got a very large bill at the end of the month because hundreds of thousands of credit cards were tested on the guest checkout flow. They're simply checking to see if the credit card data is valid. It's usually stolen, and you can buy stolen credit cards in quite large tranches for not a lot of money. So they're just testing one at a time to see if it's valid or not. And this is usually done by humans. It's not often done by automation, and it's done by humans because a lot of the times they have CAPTCHA on the page, and it's easy to bypass if a human is solving the problem, right? If you outsource this to a human labor farm in a third world country, it might cost you 10, 20 bucks a day. You get into one or two cards, it pays for itself. The ROI of the attacker is very evident. And now if we look at SAFE in an application here within Canada at a financial services client, we were able to find 60% more fraud in a particular month. These are normalized numbers, so it's not the actual fraud volume. But the existing financial services client, through their multiple internal fraud tools and algorithms and systems, let's say that in the month of May, they found $1 million. Shape, just simply through our signal set that we have as part of our Shape Enterprise Defense and the telemetry that we collect, when we apply our safe fraud signals to it, we've identified 60% more fraud than they did at a 0.1% false positive rate. That's perfectly within acceptable limits for this bank. And then if we increase our false positive rate, so the net effect of that is they have more cases to investigate per day, but we can more than double the amount of fraud that we found compared to their existing tools that have been in place for years. And the interesting thing here as well is over 70% of the fraud detected was non-monetary transaction. So it's not the account owner logging into the account, so account takeover. And also possibly fraudulent applications. If someone steals your PII, they can open up lines of credit, new credit cards in your name. We can basically disrupt that particular journey. So the Shape platform overall is there to protect and optimize across the entire user journey in almost any vertical. And we're trying to, again, answer those three questions that the bad guys are doing. Are you human? Are you who you say you are? And are you good or are you bad? And the last slide really here is that, again, to reiterate what Shape is. We are an outcome-based managed service. On the bot detection side, we are providing that outcome of more than 99% reduction of unwanted bot traffic to your site. From an infrastructure perspective, that has netted 30 to 40% savings in cloud infrastructure that might be in use. For example, if you're using AWS, Azure, GCP, if you don't need as much infrastructure anymore because you're saving some money, that's great. We can reduce the fraud, obviously, that's happening, the account takeover, and we can even remove CAPTCHA. It's not effective, it's easily bypassed. The fraud, normally that addresses the network and security folks. The fraud folks would possibly be interested in our Shape AI fraud engine. Again, we're unique here in that we are providing month over month reduction in fraud as an outcome. I don't think there's any other vendor at this space in the market that's promising to do that at this point in time. And again, if you're doing a 2FA challenge to a known good customer, that's a failure of your 2FA platform to truly understand, is it bot or not, perhaps, or is it actually the account owner or not? And if you're if you're 2FA challenging more than 10% of your good customer base, you have a big problem. And it might be interesting to contact the senior director or VP who's in charge of the customer support help desk and ask them what the #1 use case is of why do customers call in. There's a very high chance that when you have MFA deployed, password reset is probably the #1 reason why they're calling into the help desk. And that's, in our mind, that's a failure of the MFA solution to be able to correctly identify the known good users. And so at the end of the day, you know, we're part of F5. We're easy to deploy alongside of F5 BIP investment you may have already made or now part of integrated with Silverline. We are, however, also architecture agnostic. So any network environment that we can shoehorn ourselves into, we absolutely will. We're there to help you be a champion. That's really what we're trying to do at the end of the day. I could go on and on about use cases and things, problems that we've solved for customers, but ultimately, you know, we're here to fight the good fight on your behalf and really help you reduce the fraud that's possibly happening in your online and mobile application. And then through a security tool, help you actually generate money. You know, by easing the restrictions for a user to sign in, they're going to transact with you more often. We have a global money transfer client amongst the Shape customers, and we've been doing a POC with them, and they're seeing pretty drastic increases in the number of customers that are sending money overseas without increasing in fraud, simply by removing 2 of the 6 steps that they need to do when they after they've logged in as part of the money transfer flow. So what that means is they're making more money. For retailers, same thing, right? If we can remove a few of the steps, if you're looking to procure a product, if we can send some signals your way that will help you understand that this is the same customer we saw last time without any PII data being collected by Shape, think of what you can do with that. Think of how you can delight marketing and increase the revenue that your organization can deliver. So that's really it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Mitch for any Q&A.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate taking the time to explain all the cool things that Shape is up to and how you can help solve this problem. So I have a couple that have come in, but also want to encourage those of you who are listening in, if there's anything that comes up now that you're thinking about, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll get to it. That being said, if something comes up after this presentation, you can reach out to us as well, and we'll see what we can do to help continue that conversation. So I think one of the first things that would be helpful to better understand, Jason, is how Shape identifies users as being legitimate, and perhaps how's that different than some of the other vendors in this space?
Sure, excellent. So I'm going to share my screen again, if that's okay. Got some slides prepped here. So at the core of it, most all solutions in this space are deploying some type of JavaScript, and we are as well. So we have JavaScript as well as an SDK that can be integrated into a native mobile app. And at the core of it, what we're doing is we're really trying to understand 3 things. We're trying to understand the environment, such as, are you lying about the device you're claiming to be coming from, the browser version, where you are, your battery charge percent, that type of thing. We're also looking at the human behavior. So are you interacting with the device? How are you interacting with that page? Is there a ton of copy paste? Are you filling out the application form for a credit application way too fast? You know, if we're seeing the application get completed in 1.5 minutes when it normally takes 7, that might be suspicious. So we have a variety of these different things that we package together, and not one little thing is going to set it off. We really need to see a series of tells, I guess, if you want, of something that's a little suspicious. And one example that we like to use is how a browser renders a smiley face. So every web request that comes into a web server, it includes a string that's called the user agent. And it's supposed to represent the browser and the operating system version. And we know how a smiley face is supposed to be rendered on every single browser version and operating system. So if we issue a transparent challenge to the device to say, go render a smiley face, we're then going to compare the output of that completely transparently behind the scenes to what we know to be ground truth of what that should do for that particular user agent. So that's one example of where we can detect if you're lying about your environment. A good user never would but a bad user will. But the other thing is that this is not something you can fake. There's a lot of additional bot tools out there. You can read the JavaScript in verbatim of what they're looking for, and the attackers know that, and they simply randomize all the variables you're looking to collect. Shape is completely encrypted, double encrypted effectively. Each JavaScript bundle from each user is unique for that user session and only valid for 5 minutes. And the final thing to share is that Shape is a major contributor to the actual JavaScript IEEE body. 5 of the last 9 major features were actually contributed by Shape. So we know a lot more about how browsers and mobile devices behave under the covers with JavaScript in place than any other vendor. Hopefully that answered it in a long-winded way.
It did, yeah. That emoji example is a really good one. Had another question come in about Shape's ability, and I guess F5's ability more generally, to address brute forcing in terminal sessions.
Sure. So that's not a Shape-specific issue. Shape generally focuses on web, mobile, and API channels, but F5 absolutely can solve that particular issue through a variety of our products. I personally am with the Shape side, so I'd be happy to work with CDW to reach back out to that client and make sure they're put in touch with the right F5 resource.
Excellent. One additional question here about how and whether you're able to monitor Office 365 accounts.
Interesting question. So if there's any type of front end that's not just Office. So for example, we do have things like Okta integration, but Office 365 specifically, I don't think we have an integration per se. But if there was some way that you could have a landing page or an iframe that you could then put Shape into so that we can do what we need to do to make that determination first and foremost, that would certainly be something that we could investigate. But off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure that we have an integration directly with Microsoft or Office 365.
I have another question here. For an organization interested in POC with Shape, what does that look like and how much effort is involved to get that set up?
Sure. So we have a variety of different POC methods. We'd be really happy to take this up. I'd recommend you reach out to your CDW representative. But effectively, any way that you could get us even just some logs, very verbose logs from your origin server, we could definitely help answer that question. We have sort of a passive tool. It's called the Shape Passive Detection tool that we can deploy either behind Silverline or give you a virtual machine to run on-prem. That's kind of a way to just give you a snapshot of do you have an automation problem, and if you do, how big is it? But ultimately, we can do a full-blown POC if required. The beauty of Shape is we largely take care of almost everything for you. If you're an existing F5 customer with big IP, you're going to get the benefit of the F5 and Shape working together to smooth the transition and really deploy the POC without much involvement from you at all. And we can be in and out in several days, generally a couple weeks. But we've done emergency onboardings. We're very familiar with that. We can be up and running in 24 to 48 hours.
That's great. One final question for you, and you touched on it briefly, but interested to hear for organizations that have deployed this and are addressing the issues that Shape has identified, what are some of the things that you can do with that known good user data once you've been able to identify some of the malicious traffic in an environment?
Sure. So can't speak directly to the particular customer, but pre-COVID, we're working with a North American-based airline provider, and we're able to extend the login session. So as you can imagine, when you're searching for flights or searching for hotels, remember those days? there's usually a limited timeout, right? You usually only get about 15 minutes before your session expires, and then they're having you sort of sign in again. Because for a variety of issues, they don't want the inventory to get locked up, and that's one of the issues that we can solve. But what we've seen is we said, look, if we know you're a good user, you're coming from the same device you normally do, you don't ever share your account, this type of information, we can extend the login session to be like it is on mobile. So on your mobile phone, because it's a very personal device, usually for these same applications, you don't have to log in again for like a month or two at a time. We can do the same thing on the web. And so what that translates into is a higher look-to-book ratio, they call it. So there's a higher conversion rate of the users because it's easier for them to get from looking for a product to buying the product. Again, think of the Amazon experience and they're like one-click buy. We're trying to emulate that. And so we can send a signal in a header or some other mechanism of getting that to you in real time to say, you can trust this session. Loosen the restrictions that you would normally do. So that's given us some actual real world data where that particular customer and several customers now are seeing a measurable increase in their conversion ratio and an increase in conversions and obviously an increase in sales to a non-insignificant amount. So we're talking between 1% and 3% increase in conversion ratio, which is having a pretty marked increase in the sales. So again, the ROI, if we come back to it, I think in that case, the ROI of Shape is generally measured in weeks, perhaps a couple months, but we're not talking like a traditional 6 to 9 month ROI, like a lot of other solutions. We can provide pretty high confidence that we're going to be able to exhibit some very compelling results for you very quickly.
Well, that's it for the questions that have been recorded so far. So again, just want to reiterate, if any of you on the line or listening in afterwards to the recorded presentation have any follow-up questions, we'd be happy to talk further about that with you. And Jason, just want to thank you again for taking the time to explain the problem space here and some of the unique ways that Shape is able to help organizations tackle this difficult problem.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day.